This is from my previous video where I discovered that the USB port on my jumper no longer worked and it was pivoting on the front pins, as it turned out. So the first thing to do was to figure out what that connector was. It turned out to be a USB Mini B, and I've got the pin outs and I found on eBay that I could go and buy replacements for a few dollars, which I did. So I waited patiently for them to arrive before attempting to remove the socket from the board. So when I did pull the socket off, it came off quite easily, just slipping and leaving the pins. So there's 3 long pins at the back, 2 at the front. So there's 5 pins in all. So I thought, well, that's good. They're firmly attached to the board. I've got a good thing to solder onto, so that should be fairly straightforward. So there's the socket in the back of it where it just pulled the wires through. So I knew I didn't want to put it straight back in the same place. I just want to connect wires to it. So we're looking, what I did, I drew out a diagram showing that circuit board attached to the main board and carefully identified which pin was what, from 1 to 5, and what's connected. I then used some stiff colour-coded wires to solder to one of the new sockets I bought, and then I realised I needed flexible wires to attach from the circuit board to those stiff wires. And I got those flexible wires from the disconnected speakers from the 2 Santa drones I bought, the E11s. So here I am with my soldering rig, which is a slow and hesitant process. So I'm showing you the process of desoldering the wires from one of the Santa drone speakers, and you're also looking at this, you'll see why I don't bother to try and film my soldering as it goes on. Apart from being technically difficult, it'd be a pretty boring process. So I'm just obtaining these nice thin wires. They come off quite easily as I apply the hot soldering iron. Right, so at this stage you can see I've attached all 4 wires to appropriate pins. The one on the extreme left is actually pin 2 because it's connected to the pin that came out, but it's easier to get it in the middle of those 3 pins on the left, easy to attach it to. So at this stage I've connected the first of the flexible wires from the circuit board to pin number 2 of the socket. And coming back, I've got all 4 wires connected. The brown one, which is power, and the next 2, which are the data, and the final one is the earth. And actually there was an extra wire I had to put on later, which went from the case to another place on that board, which is the drain, or sort of overall earth. So here's the back of it. Just harking back, I've cut out a little socket, a little slot in the case where the socket goes into, because one of the things I was really keen was finding a better way to mount it so it's external, it's firmly fixed in position, so I'm not going to stress that socket any more than I have to when I connect and disconnect cables. And I want it in a place where it's not going to touch the ground when the transmitter is sitting. Quite why Jumper didn't do this in the first place, I don't know. They've had 2 attempts so far to put a decent socket. Here's hoping the next attempt is a bit more successful or well thought out. So that's just showing the socket sitting in its slot that I've cut out with all the wires on, apart from that extra wire that goes from the case to the earth point on the board that I put in later. So that's the case clean, shut up, and just showing attaching and disattaching cable. So it's off to one side, it's not getting in the way, it's not going to stress it pulling in and out. I just don't understand why they didn't do something like this from day one. Okay, so despite all that work, it didn't work. I'm not sure where to go next. I think I'll just wait for the next version. It still works fine for the models I use it for. I'm just showing the cases. The case that came with my Amaway goggles was kind of useless. The case that came with the jumper is just the right size to fit the goggles and the antenna. So, I don't know, just another example of poor design. God knows what.
Turns out I've just found a use for the Amaway goggles case. A home for a tiny whoop, batteries plus a propeller puller offer. So nice to be able to repurpose things.